green there, Kevin. Can we hang it on the green?
Says rifle, shotgun, survival.
We're gonna put pistols.
You don't want to shoot a bear with that.
Huh?
You don't want to shoot a bear with that.
Which one?
Make it mad.
Mine. Put it in.
Make it
Wouldn't
mad.
do much.
Get up.
What are you trying to do?
Can you find out what that other metal,
Did you, see that, blow up, that suit? It's over there. We got it. We got it yesterday. You want that little picture I have of you?
Yeah.
That thing. And I think what this one showed, squeezing it.
Oh, that was thumping pretty good.
Did it rain? Oh, wait a minute. You know, it's so loud.
Yeah.
Back right, Bill.
Oh, okay. It's on the 25. Lois?
He went outside. He'll be back in a minute.
How can we have one like that?
Cause I have to. Nobody else will.
Back there, yeah.
Here it comes. Honey, they were one of you.
All depends.
You said you
I was
said
gonna say, I hate to be dependent on that thing, but I hate to be on the other end of it.
you said if you get 20 feet away, you can hit him in a week. But he Thompson something was saying that.
You don't want to put that amazing.
Or they have these,
You don't need that one.
it's kind of like the super, you know.
Right.
That hurt. Growling, what got no hands doing anything? Is Roger around?
Hey,
Morning, John. Did you put the keys back, did you, Chris?
Yes, I did. They're on top of the.
Let's see, started making them in 1910 and put them over in 1933. Shoot, probably maybe about. When I bought the box of shells for the other day, I'm not gonna pay $16 a day.
Stranger angle that.
Dean? Oh, okay. Anything about doing it yourself, too. My brother and I, the day when we saw it, we did a bull in something, you know, shoot 22 people. The old lady here. That was We can just stop by traffic out there, fire, and we can have it. I just been 2 or 3 times a day, get it all off. I said, if you got any trucks out here, we wouldn't have all that.
That was yesterday.
I think so. Yeah, the devil, I was walking in the window. That thing, every time you turn around, you see your face, it's like Peter.
I don't think that guy happy was here yesterday. We had a guy here yesterday, who was, you know, from the Navy, and they're gonna bring over a bunch of boys. He's gonna bring, 19 boys over.
Today.
No, not that. They don't train for short. Whatever day that they train, you know, they train once a month. And, so we would, bring them over.
Yes.
Well, we should put
that
that case.
And say, those that you have now, we're gonna fix you up.
Yeah, we're one morning.
That green digger, that's another.
Okay, guys, I guess we need to figure out how to put this banner up. Got that wire.
Okay, he's started.
There's more wire, I found some wire.
So,
That's all right. He had some idea of what was, you know, here, so.
He looked all over and he said, we're gonna have more stuff.
what's that?
That boy at the CD yesterday,
Oh, yeah.
he actually said, if you got so-and-so coat, he said, no, we have it now. You got so-and-so coat? No, we have it now. He said, we're gonna fix you up. I said, you have to yourself.
Whenever you put that uniform up display, why you
Say what?
Well, that run these masks, that duct tape down both sides of the sink.
You heard that, how we duct tape?
We had duct tape. The wire, it's gonna look even worse. The duct tape's not gonna look good. Folks outside are just hanging up there. No, we're leaving.
Don't have a rope on underneath.
What?
The rope,
Now, well, we got rope long enough, but, well, you have to have it right, you have on sock that.
On the car.
You have to do it, lock that in the back. Quarter inch in.
Turn it off.
Get down there.
we're running out of everything.
Well, okay, there's pieces. You have to do that.
So that price is station show.
You wanna take that back?
That's why it makes us old fashioned.
Better piece at the front. Back.
You find a bigger money, hold it, let's finish it. Clovis, are you gonna sing?
More day, work.
Oh, no. That's it.
We, I don't work for something, we put it in there beside,
Don't see if they're in out
put this one out there. Well, we're gonna center that, we're not gonna center that there. We are, this is like, deal anyway, we need to. Actually, Jim, bring that back. We'll take, let it hang down.
you go, Raymond.
Okay, there, right now, there. Well, here, no, bring her down here, put it in the bottom shelf of this case right here.
This is what you're supposed to give to your doctor.
Okay, put them both right there in the bottom of that case right there. You can't hardly read it, this guy's name plate on it. That'll be fine, that way if he comes, why, he'll be on this plate. Okay.
Harold's gonna,
Oh, see.
He said he's gonna come over and help us design stuff for us later on. You arrange, ideas. Around some museums and bring thoughts.
There's a
you
lot
gonna
of
leave these lay on top, Raymond?
Wait, now, Chris.
Hi, you gonna leave these lay on top?
Yeah. It won't fit inside. Yeah, okay.
Just want somebody to walk in and pick them up.
Yeah, we're gonna be here, so we're gonna have part-time people.
Check it, go in. They can go inside that.
Right.
I'm trying to think of, I'm looking at, no,
Because that's a rear.
Actually, it's not.
One thing we didn't bring up, we need, for anything else, farm or door.
Yeah, Marvin Farm.
Oh, I forgot. There he was going down.
You recording everything in here?
The bunch of books that I bought, but I'd rather read them before I give them away.
That's true.
Yeah, I'll never give them away. I don't know. And I bought stuff on Eisenhower and Winston Churchill.
Looks like a 48-star flag there.
Yeah.
You won't know what you
I just happened to find it in the box all.
Now, somebody called, it's not,
Ray, let's go eat. The line is about run out.
Forget it. Understood? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. He got his butt shoot for that. He had to make it a while. I'll get that. Either you're a man or you're not. So this kid's sitting there crying and all that stuff. Yeah, he didn't have it. What a kid did. It's happened, really. Go back.
furniture out?
No, Rob's working on that. Yesterday or day before yesterday, I talked to him. He said, I have got to get him to get that stuff out of there. So, give us a dissertation. For those of you who don't know him too well, Ron Cutter.
Rose says he's gonna get up and talk.
He's one of our newest members. I'm not going to elaborate on his qualifications. I know we have talked, and I sat in the van with him one evening out at the fairgrounds and watching a lot of things. But I think he knows just enough to be about electricity and be dangerous. So, Ron, floor is yours.
First time I remember this area here, I'm just reminiscing a minute. Dad and I came out here, and there was a farmhouse sitting over here where the administration was. All of us sitting next to a beautiful tree. This big farm, and bulldozers were at work. The first time I seen them.
They used to buy eggs there.
Yeah. I can't remember the name of the farm. It was a two-story house, and that same building was remodeled. He was a contractor, and he remodeled. And they turned that farmhouse into the administration building for a short time. I'm employed at Channel 10, of course. I've been out there for about 30 years. Been through all the changes that's occurred. Acquainted with this organization just by accident because I do the remote broadcasts out there, part of it anyway, at the fairgrounds. So that's why I mentioned it. It's very easy for you guys to get on TV if you happen to be out there, because we usually interview someone in that area. But since you're moving, we're going to stretch the cables a little bit, but we have a microwave that allows us to reach just about anywhere in the fairgrounds. So you probably saw it on the golf cart if you've been out there. And just a little horn, we can point just about any direction out there as long as the trees with the Ferris wheel isn't in the way. Of course, TV is that way. You can microwave it, satellite it, just about any place you want. And right now there are satellites all the way around the earth. There's hundreds of them. Set at 23,000 miles up. And anybody can get a license and a transmitter that can be authorized and send signals up to these satellites, whether it be data, picture, music, whatever it happens to do. Telephone conversations. Each satellite will take 24 transponders. Each transponder will take 2 channels of TV, thousands of channels of voice and data. So you can imagine each satellite what it's capable of. My time at Channel 10 has been maintenance mostly. And my wife and I collect antiques. I collect antique watches, collect hands, so ceramic miniature hands. And that's mostly what it's about. I thought I mentioned
light bulbs on the car.
Yeah. No, light bulb change. The tower, I mentioned something about Channel 10. Channel 10 started downtown, on the corner of Jefferson and Walnut. Mm-hmm. The building was called the Springfield Club, I think. Is that right? Springfield Club. And it was a beautiful home sitting down there. And KTTS, of course, was the first call letters. And they started as a radio station in Springfield, 1400 on the dial. Then they got FM, and then they got TV. This was back in the 50s. And they built a tower on top of that building with concrete piers all the way through the building to the floor. With a big tall AM tower on there, stacked their FM on it, and stacked the TV on it. That's how they got started. That's how they got on the air. First, by putting just a temporary antenna up beside the building, 2,000 watts of TV. You remember all that wrestling? Jack LaLanne and all those early programs that were started.
Sports are good.
Yeah. No, we didn't do it.
Can't wait till you get
That's a Halo.
My name is Mike.
And then they built the new studio out on Division Street. Of all things, to build a tower in an airport. Because the owners that own the TV station own the airport. They still do, Cooper. And built a 500-foot tower out there. And that was where Channel 10 started as KTTS for a while, and they had to sell a license when everybody had split up. So we became KBOR, still on the same channel. And then a few years later, in the 60s, we built a 2,000-foot tower out of Portland. And now that's where TV comes out of. Portland is also where all the other TV stations is, and on the TV 10 tower, which is the tallest one by not a whole lot, there's 3 TV stations on it. Channel 21, Channel 33, Channel 10, and a bunch of other antennas. That's the 3 TV stations. And the last part of last year, Telecable went around to all the TV stations and hooked them all up to fiber optics. So they no longer receive the local broadcasters from just antennas, like anyone. They just had an antenna array over Telecable. Now it comes in on fiber optics to the Telecable offices. Anyway, then they turned it around on fiber again and sent it back out to everybody. So our picture quality, in fact, the picture quality of all the TV stations is much better than it used to be. And now if Portland goes off the air, you won't know it if you're on cable. But if you're off air, you'll see it. Which every time the wind blows very hard, it does. But Webster Power system out there is kind of subject to wind. One of the reasons I joined was because I'm interested in restoration of electronic equipment, and I have collected a few pieces of military equipment. And I brought some oldies here to show you. I'm not going to take you just a few minutes, but I'll talk about restoration a little bit. This little box here, and its carrying case is what was used a lot in jungle communications during the war. This was made in the 40s. This is a telegraph set. It's a complete little telegraph set. It has both a bell sounder and it has an earphone for tone. And tone is what you might use. This little strap goes around your head. It's designed for long wire communication. You've probably seen war movies where the guy with a real wire running across the battlefield. Maybe he's hooking up one of these, or sound power pole maybe. And that's the tone system. Those of you who understand what I just said probably don't see Q.
Not it.
I have 2 of these units, and you can hook them up and play with them back and forth on just a pair of wire. You can go for several miles with it. This whole system here is part of a radio transmitter receiver system. Used, you'll notice, in front of it is cast iron. I get an idea that they wanted to protect this against explosive forces in front of it. The system has a transmitter, which has cast iron thrown on it, and another receiver, and it all fits into a box or a mounting plate. It's used in tanks and various military like jeeps and so on. One of the problems in restoring equipment, depending on what you want to do with it. If you want to use it in a museum atmosphere where for display purposes, then cleaning it up and putting it out and making it documented is probably sufficient. But for operation, that's another thing. Occasional operation, it would be nice in a museum to have some things in operation. But most of the military equipment, especially aircraft equipment, is really not compatible power-wise, and it makes it very difficult to build power supplies for it. This, for instance, required a dynamotor, which is set right here. A dynamotor is a generator device. It takes 12 volts and turns it into 100 volts, 150 volts, so it's all direct current. So you have to build an AC power supply that would adapt onto this unit so you can operate. In the case of aircraft equipment, which I'll restore, most of that is 28 volts and 115 volts, 400 cycle, three-phase or single phase. And that's not available anywhere. It's very hard to simulate, but power supplies have been built. And in the case of museum, most of the things that you could probably set up conveniently would be AC powered, if you want someone to operate there. I'd like to set up a little transmitter receiver station in there if possible. I have a 2-meter system that I think is for Jeep operations or for tank installation. And I think it might work fine. Any questions?
You've done just the Jeep that door.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one Henry.
No, it wouldn't work on that Jeep. You'd probably need it to run the Jeep.
How is that? Most things I think were done with a purpose. What, was there a purpose for that type of electrical hookup?
Yeah, because it was all portable equipment. Somewhere there was a battery that started the engine in whatever machine, so they could make it compatible with the battery. Usually 24 volts is very common. And all of these units that I had, or did have at least, were convertible between 12 and 24.
They started with 24 and then you used the dynamotor to kick it up to 100 volts or whatever.
Yeah. And the dynamotor is a very inefficient power source. It's only about 40% efficient. Because a lot of the energy it takes to run the dynamotor is spent doing that, and what little else you get. The dynamotor is just a little smaller unit, about so big, and it's got brushes on each end of it. It's double brush, so you have the input side and output side. It's an old-fashioned way of doing it, but it worked fine. Dynamotor is extremely reliable.
They're very rugged too. Very
Yes,
rugged.
they were.
They have to be to bounce around on a Jeep and trucks.
Yeah,
Did you
this is
get
built.
interested in this as a result of being in the service?
Well, my military career is pretty boring, actually. I thought I mentioned it. But it turned out pretty good. My dad says, there's an Eisenhower plan you ought to take advantage of. I said, what's that? I said, well, I'll tell you what, let's go down to the Naval Reserve Training Center.
They trying to get rid of you.
So we went down there, and the Eisenhower plan was pretty neat. Originally, you would go in for, I guess, 4 years and stay 2 years in the reserves, or maybe it's the other way around.
2 and 6.
2 and 6.
Yeah.
So the Eisenhower plan says, well, why don't you? This plan is you will be obligated for 8 years reserve only. So I signed up. I was only 17 and a half, and I had to have his signature anyway, so we signed up, and I stayed in, would you believe, for 31 years. But I enjoyed it. I taught basic electronics, electricity, radio theory, radar, antenna theory, and all that sort of stuff.
You also repaired,
Well,
connected a lot of equipment.
yeah, of course,
for the
maintain
boys.
all their equipment. Their reserve center here, as you know, may not know, was located on Drury campus. And it was in those old Butler buildings. And they had 2 complete radar installations here. They had surface search and an air search radar. And I had a lot of fun working on those, maintaining. They were for shipboard radars that was actually mounted on the tower there at the radar, at the center. And they had a good communication system. They had big teletype room, transmitter room. And all of us hooked up, all of us working. So it was a lot of fun here. And Mr. Gus and I.
Yeah, you maintained them and I operated them. I was radar man.
That's right.
And that just brought up some old memories, didn't it?
Yeah.
The night that the Air Force Board of Authorities came and took all of us in radar to the side and debriefed us and told us that we did not see what we saw that night on our screens. Did you ever hear any more about that? We tracked some kind of UFO from Kansas City into Arkansas, and we did our calculations. The sucker was doing in excess of 2,500 miles an hour, and this is back in the 50s. So we immediately got a hotline to Fordham, and Fordham told us to wait one, and then the next time Fordham called us, said, keep all your people there. And then the Air Force came in and said forget anything you saw or did and destroy any records. Which all we got did was
The
just
only UFO I can remember was the trains on the north side there going by. We could see them on the radar.
Yeah.
The Air Force had and I say this because I retired Air Force, they had a handle that you didn't see what you saw.
No, radar.
Never happened.
I don't know.
Asked Raymond. Raymond was at Roswell and I was at Clovis. We had a few of them there that would come up and they'd call you and say, you didn't see anything. There was nothing there. So we know we went through that too.
That's right, there was nothing there. I did not see anything.
Is any of that equipment available for museum purposes anymore? Or the radar transmitter?
No. They dismantled. The
Took it
whole
to-
place is gone.
Took it to some warehouse?
It's all gone.
It's all
They
gone.
built a new training center over on Fremont and didn't install any live radar whatsoever.
That unit became channel
What
21.
contacts do you have, Ron, with the weather service out here? Now, they just updated.
No,
That building.
I just wondered if we make contact with them, the equipment they took out, they deemed obsolete, but yet it might be operational for our purpose, as you say.
Well, yeah, museum display. You have to have a license, I think, now to get a radar signal. I don't know. They
Well,
can
they
issue one
want
for us.
Well, without it being operational.
Yeah, without being operational. Put it on. Is there a TAM in here with license? I didn't know. Well, this set I have is a 2-meter military. So perhaps it can be put to use.
Ron and I talked extensively about some of his items, and he was going to try to set up a display at the museum and as much as workable as possible. So, make yourself available whenever, as he said, he's got one item there, it's about 100 pounds, so we'll need somebody's Volkswagen to haul them on.
Oh, I have a 1,000-watt transmitter, which is flood conduction garbage, which it's a military version of a transmitter. If the museum wants it, it was operational.
We have an approach light.
Now, large tubes, I have tubes.
We have an approach light. I think it would be nice if we could figure out some way of hooking it up. Supposed to be operational if you have some way of hooking it down. Get your voltage and everything.
What type of?
It's a Vassy light.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Military version. It's a portable type Vassy.
You know, when you go to the air show this year, they take you on your trip over there. The Air Force has a lot of stuff. When they tore down all the dew line and all that stuff wasn't all thrown away.
Right.
And it's sitting around, government still has it sitting around in the warehouse and stuff like that. It's still there. Big radar units that were up in great big white domes you see. When they tore those down, that wasn't all junk. It was put away in that.
But it's obsolete, isn't it?
Yeah, it's obsolete, but,
Sorry.
if we could get it, it'd be something.
Is the equipment from Jeff City, and there is some place up there that's a military dump?
Yeah.
Right.
That-
We have to apply for a license.
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah, Fort Leonard Wood, St. Louis.
You say that is possible?
Pardon me?
Is that possible?
Oh, yes, right.
Because I would think the museum would want equipment built in the 40s or for the most part. You wouldn't want a lot of solid state transistors and stuff. Yes.
Big vacuum too.
Yeah. I have a collection of large vacuum tubes and some for this transmitter. They're antique, they're not manufactured. In fact, tubes aren't made at all.
How large an area are we going to designate for your?
Let's just let it pile up. You can decide that. I don't.
Well, we kind of need an idea, just like our library, see, setting it up, that's specifically library meeting room. We designate an area for the radio display. We're looking at a 6x8 area or 8x8, you know, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Some things
10 by
don't
10.
move around much.
10 by 10, at least. You might want a table to put a receiver on.
Well, if you have something there, Raymond, that somebody can put their hands on, you know, at least seeing it operated and stuff like that. You can do away with some of your boards and stuff, you know, telling me because the board is there, you know. But if somebody can look at something, like an airplane, I can show you a picture all day long, but if I can show you an airplane sitting out there,
Right.
that's the difference.
Yeah, gear like this, you can, I don't see any problem with the public message.
Is there any chance we could put a unit in one of our Jeeps for the like the fair?
For the fairs, yeah, I have a Jeep mountable unit that might work
Something
for that purpose. Getting it mounted down might be a problem.
I was gonna tell him, children love the box, and then he has used to have the walkie-talkies, and our daughters,
Yeah, a lot of ones.
I'm telling you, had a blast with them, because any child can get the key
Pull out.
and get something coming back, and that makes them, hey, Dad, let's go back
Oh,
and
yeah.
play with this. Remember, you know.
Getting more realistic here, is there any way we could get the radio working in the Cobra? So we could put a kid in a helmet in the Cobra, and maybe you could plug someone in the Jeep at the fair or something like that. So, I mean, make it. You have to have power pack, the Jeep's only 12 volts. Yeah, I mean,
Well, you
get
can
me-
build
me to
something
make it
12
more
volt
realistic.
in that Cobra too.
Or so-
It has-
so-
I have lots of power.
Yeah, so that one kid in the back, there's a box, he's a Cobra.
Is it
Talking
not
to kids,
operational at the moment?
What's that?
The radio?
No, it has no radio.
Oh, okay.
We're talking about putting one in.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Really what we need in that,
You don't have
Maybe intercom or something like that in it.
Oh, I see, intercom.
Yeah.
all we need in that is tape going, telling about the history of that particular vehicle. Just give it
And
a repeated history.
Jeff,
Over and over.
Jeff, make an intercom, so a kid can sit in the back seat with a helmet on, talk to the kid in the front seat and the gunner seat up front, you know, things like that.
By virtue of 2 accidents, I found out a little more about Cobra too, so that will be revealed at a later date. At any rate, we can make some realistic situation by the sound, as Gil was talking about, a continuous type tape thing, or a push the button, or a casual. Same thing with the radios and so on like
Is there
that.
any radio equipment that you have now that we can't have?
We don't have any radio equipment right now.
Really, you're our source on radio.
Well, I mean, I didn't know if the museum already owns them.
No.
Yeah, no.
Oh, I see.
When we got our Cobra, it was kind of stripped down. Well, you know.
You still have the top, one of the top microphones, don't you? We give it to the squadron bridge here.
I did bring the mic, gave to the squadron years ago. Having, it's a chest set.
Civil Air Patrol.
No, it was the Confederate, I think, came up. The one with the B-29. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gone.
It's gone.
Well, that's quite a while ago.
We do have a set of walk.
I got a good tour.
We do have a set of the old field telephones that do similar to what he showed us there.
Okay, I find that.
My children had played with that when they were kids. They have one in each bedroom and they'd call each other at night.
Well, I don't have more to talk about.
I don't think your military career was dull. You probably had a lot of fun.
Yeah, but
That's
if
It
you
was
come
all
to
reserved.
some of the places he went and
It was all
his
reserved.
security in some of the areas that he was in is I think, very unique. He always
Tell us about it.
No.
Tell us about it.
I'll mention one incident. I went to Wichita, Kansas, and worked at Wichita Boeing for a short time. And I enjoyed something. Something happened there. I really think you'd all probably enjoy it too. I was electronic certification technician, and I worked in the electronics lab, which is a big building out near the flight line. It's a two-story building. And I got to work on the MD-9 fire control system for the B-52. And this consists of 4 50 caliber machine guns mounted about so far apart with a radar disc sitting right in between them. And there's 2 radar systems with it. One, the search radar, which is over the operator's head, and the other was the gun control radar, which is sitting in the gun. And I don't know if you're familiar with a B-52 to the extent that the whole back end of that 52, gun turrets, the area where the gunner sits, the radar, and all that is detachable. And it comes off the back end of the 52. Cables and everything unplugged, and the computer and everything is put on a roll around. And it's a big unit, very tall. And they roll that off the flat line into this building, bring it up on an elevator, and it goes through certification tests, sighting and all that sort of thing. And so one day it was on my lunch period, and I was walking out around close to flight line, and not far from the building, about 1,000 yards or so from the building, there's a monstrous hangar. And I walked over there to it, and it was a brand new B-52 set. I'm dating myself, that's all. But there wasn't anybody around it. And there's a ladder going up to it. I had it in. I went in there. They were doing landing gear tests. It was up on jacks. But there was a stairwell. So I went up the stairwell, looked in there, and it was dark. So my eyes got acquainted, and I realized that everything in there was lit with red lights. And everything was backlit with red lights. And I was looking at one of the top secret radar and reconnaissance B-52s. It wasn't bomb. It was reconnaissance. It was loaded with electronics. It was consoles down both sides of the fuselage. And everything was on, and everything was lit with little red, all kinds of red lights. There was lights behind dials. There was little lights, like electron light, little bitty ones that you could move around, and it was all red. And it took a while to get used to it, but it was a thrill with the seal. And so that's my trip with B-52.
And you didn't get arrested?
So you made a clean getaway?
They didn't see you.
Well,
Nobody saw me.
But
So
you had to
I
find
had my badge and everything on.
when you went in there, you put on a badge.
Yeah. So anyway, that's, I enjoyed every time at Boeing. I worked on B-47 and 52 fire control.
Okay, George, you got it.
To start out with, when Raymond asked me to do this, I thought it was saying of my mother. She said, that man took his hogs to a poor market. So you're stuck with it. But Thursday of this week, I was at Kansas City, the Smithsonian Travel Museum they have. And they had an airplane on display who had made the first transcontinental air flight in the U.S. The airplane made it in 11 stops. 4 of those were crashes. So he had to rebuild the airplane. Well, this is an airplane of a little later vintage. And we
have turn the lights down.
where's the?
Up the front.
How many volunteers did it take to turn off?
40.
So I don't airplane the van finish.
Should have run off.
It's upside down. That's a World War II airplane. About 11 years later, the old Fokker triplane. People was interested, not World War II, World War I. And that was taken at the Rhinebeck Museum in New York.
Richmond ticket.
And
This
this was one from the other side. Many of you people never get up to Rhinebeck. That's a real interesting place to go. These airplanes are not strictly museum pieces. You can take a ride in one for about $25 for 15 minutes. That's on weekends during the summer. Now what? What I was going to talk about mostly was my military experience. I worked for Cessna Aircraft back in the early 40s, when the war was declared and all that. So I had a deferment for a while. And one day I got a letter that my classification had been changed to 1A. Well, that was a pretty good indication that I would not be there much longer. And I made up my mind right quick that I would much rather go to war by the seat of my pants than the soles of my shoes. So I went down to Tulsa, Oklahoma, enlisted in the flight training program in June of 42. Well, I went into the reserves and went back on the job. Next October I wanted to quit. My foreman says, you can't quit because I won't give you a release to go to work. I said, okay, I don't care, but I'll quit. And he says, well, you know that as soon as you quit, you're going to go in the Army? And I said, no, I'm already there. I raised my right hand about 6 months ago. So he didn't have any more to say, and I quit. I went home and went quail hunting. My home is over in southeast Kansas. So we got our notice to report to on the 3rd of January, 43. Report to Kansas City, and reported and rode the train to San Antonio, Texas, where they give us a whole bunch of idiot tests and physical tests and took pictures. I don't know what all they didn't do. And then we went to pre-flight school. Howard probably has been through that too. They had the class system patterned after West Point, the upper class and the lower class. And the lower class really gave you an awakening. You were never happy, you never smiled, you never walked. You always ran wherever you went. You never went by yourself. You didn't have enough intelligence to go by yourself. And anyway, that went on for about 4.5 weeks. And in that period, we had class 4 hours a day. We had physical training 4 hours a day. And that physical training always ended up with a road run. And that was 5 miles. And needless to say, when I finished pre-flight school, I was in good physical condition, probably the best physical condition I ever had been or would be. Anyway, from there I went to Tulsa, Oklahoma to Spartan School of Aeronautics. And there was where I was introduced to another airplane. PT-19. And I thought that was a great airplane. And I think it was. And about 3 days before I graduated from pilot training, I got to take an elimination ride. And I didn't get to fly anymore. That was the end of that. So, as a result of me being eliminated, I was court-martialed. People say, well, you weren't court-martialed. I said, yes, I was. Because as an aviation cadet, you have officer status in the service. And they took me from an officer to a buck private in about 15 seconds. They had a court-martial. So there, I went from there to Shepherd Field for basic training. I hadn't had any military training, I guess. But from there, I went to Armament School, Flower Field, Denver, Colorado. And then Aerial Gunnery School at Hollins, Texas. And then after that, we went to Blythe, California, by way of Salt Lake City in January, with snow about hip deep for hippopotamus. But anyway, we got there and we went to Blythe, California, and we was taking our flight training there, our combat training, and that airplane right there, not that particular airplane, but one like it, a B-24. Which I don't think there's many of those flying now. But we went to took our operational training there and was supposed to learn what combat was like. There's another picture. And the B-24 was quite a airplane. I forgot just how many there was. There was 24 different models of the B-24. And I have a book here that's got pictures of most of them if you want to look at them. But there was 24 different models. The Privateer was the Navy version, but it did not have the twin tails. Other than that, it was the same. And that particular one there is probably the one that most of them were made from. That's the Model D. That's the one we took our training in the States. I think the first one I showed you here, yeah, this one. That's the H model. That's like the one I flew in combat. The reason I know that's an H model is the nose turret. That was at the time that they started putting turrets on the airplane. Consolidated turret, which was a tail turret that originally was put up there before they made the Emerson turret. The B-24 had 4 turrets. They had the tail turret, which was consolidated. The nose turret was built by Emerson. The top turret, right behind the pilot, co-pilot, was Martin, and Sperry built the ball turret in the back. The difference between this one and the B-17, the ball turret on the 24 was retractable. And what we did in our crew was we flew with the ball turret retracted, and whenever we got hit by fighters, we lowered the ball turret to get the ball turret. And some of you pilots might like to know what this is. That's the cockpit of a B-24. Not complicated, I guess, by today's standards, but that was a pretty complicated cockpit. And I was, like all the rest of the crewmen, I got a little bootleg time up there in one of those pilot seats. And it sure was different than the old PT-19. My instructor on the PT-19 was always telling me about hints on the controls. Well, I didn't know how to stop it, but one day I worked at trimming it up. Our airfield was south of Tulsa, about 20 miles. And I had the airplane all trimmed. And I was sitting there, headed back toward the municipal airport, my hands on my knees, my feet on the floor, and he grabbed the stick and started to whip it back and forth and stomp on the rudders. He said, "That's the way I like to see you, nice and relaxed." I told him when I got on the ground, I was as relaxed as I could be because I wasn't on the control. I didn't know what he was wanting, but anyway, I'll tell you a little story now. I guess when we got on the boat, overseas, and we went over on the USS General Philip Mitchell. Well, the officers ate in the officers' mess upstairs. They had tablecloths and chairs and nice silverware. And I was one of the enlisted men, so I ate the rest of them. We had stand-up tables. We ate on stainless steel trays. We all got 2 meals a day. So an air crew gets to be pretty friendly with one another. Anyway, we got trade uniforms with the officers. We take turns eating in the officers' mess. That I don't think was strictly according to military law. We might have ended up in Leavenworth if we had found out. We solved the problem. We got to England, and we went to Stone, England. From there we went to Northern Ireland and to combat training again. I remember the colonel gave us the first speech, says, "You guys have had the finest training in the world. You could recognize any aircraft in 100th of a second, but here, forget it. If he points his nose at you, shoot him. We don't care what kind he is." So we learned that pretty quick. And the other thing he said was, you were always taught to fire in 5-round bursts. And so here, we don't worry about how many gun barrels you burn up. Take as many along with you as you want. So we just hold the trigger down till you get it. Well, that was a different training than what we used to. Now, this photograph goes upside down again. That is the 8th Air Force air bases over in what they call East Anglia in England. And that's just the 8th Air Force there. Now, people wondering why that part of England didn't fall off into the sea. You can't see that too well. But that's all the air bases over in Eastern England.
You mean the U.S. Air Force?
U.S. Air bases, yes. So we had a bunch of our bomb group was formed at Carrington, Kansas, and I wasn't with them at the time, but I think some people might like to know a little bit of the history. But they flew overseas from Harrington, Kansas. see the route they took down Palm Beach, Florida, down into South America. At Belém, they had their first accident. There's a short runway and one of the airplanes grounded. Broke the propeller off and came in and cut the pilot's arm off. That was the first mishap. The second mishap was over in Africa at Dakar. I don't remember what it was. Altogether, they lost 3 airplanes out of 26, I believe, that was doing the. And that was the route they took. That's the longest route. Most of them took the northern route where they went from Bangor, Maine to Newfoundland, to Reykjavik, Iceland, into Ireland, and then on the crooked, I can't get it to stay. But that is a list of all the missions that the 448th Bomb Group, which I was attached to, had flown. And if you see the 384 little green things there, that is flights that I've made. In fact, there was one more in there, because the 5th one, I only had a one-way ticket. Now, when all these airplanes were in the air, each bomb group had its particular pattern that it flew in. The green one happened to be the 448th Bomb Group. That's where they took off and gathered up the formation of their group.
How long did you stay in that loop? I mean, until all the planes got there?
Until all the planes got there. Right. And that's the formation pattern for the day that we made our last trip. And down at the bottom, one with the circle, that was our trip. We were lucky, I guess, to go over as a crew, because a lot of people went over as replacements and unacquainted, but we got pretty well acquainted with one another, because all 10 of us went through the operational training, everything out of flight. I remember our pilot the night that we finished flight training, he said he wanted everybody over at his barracks right after chow, and over there. He said, well, you know, I don't believe in drinking while we're flying. But he opened his foot locker, he said, I've got a nice supply we can start on tonight. So we had a party.
When you have ones X'd out on the right side, they didn't make it.
They didn't make the copy. They just, and I couldn't read the names. I wrote to a lady over in England, and I have a picture of her later. She dug up all this information for me. They have a group there at Seething, England, trying to restore the old control tower and make it into a museum. And the Flying Club has the old air base now. And they have a memorial set up there. That's the next step. You didn't make it home, that's where you went. The German captain kept telling me that the war was over for me. Well, it wasn't, it just started.
What did the Tide Cobb or whatever mean at the bottom?
That's the name of the town.
Okay, in Poland? Okay.
Yeah. Gross Krakow was what the Germans named it. Kachawa is what it's named today.
Okay.
And, that little book is the book that I kept notes on and all of our experiences. On the QT, I wasn't allowed to take pictures like the officers were. And then I got my pilot's license down at the bottom and the little deal I got from Half Army introduced me to the airport station. So I wanted to visit. So, and let's see.
What was the date you entered?
June 18th, 1944. I can't see much at the top, but that's the railroad station at Kachawa. That picture was taken in 93. In 93, I went over there to see what it was like. And that's the station master's house there across the road from where the railroad station is.
That was where you got off the train?
That's where we got off the train.
Learn what routes went. The Schnellbahn.
God. And there, that's me when we was going out to where the camp was. It was about 4 or 5 kilometers from the railroad station where the camp was. And that lower picture there is one that I kind of thought maybe that was a replica of one of the barns that we might have slept in when we were walking across country. That's a plaque that was on the rock there that the Poles had put up. There had been a war prisoner camp for Allied prisoners during the war. And the top is a tree there beside that rock. That's where the camp used to be. There's not much there today.
There's nothing left of the camp, nothing left at all.
No. There's what's left in the camp. Potato salad. And that sign that's in the tree says, in this place during 1942 to 45, existed an Allied prisoner of war camp. And,
Did they feed you a lot of potatoes, George?
no, not a lot of them, no. France, Austria, and the prison camps that were there. They had a lot.
Where was your camp? Young man that lived with us, he was in the second year, and he's talking about the prison camps that are in Poland now, or places there. No, my hope is right here, just a stone's throw from Germany. So he's telling about there's some bunkers there in that area in his town, some big bunkers, and also a prison camp right close right in this area here, so.
Well, in the circle was where our camp was, right up here. And during February 6th, they closed the camp. And we walked out with whatever we could carry on our back, and we didn't have a whole lot of material. The backpack made out of shorts or anything we had. And Berlin is right down in here. But we walked here, we're across Germany over into here, and back again, and sleeping in barns or in fields or anywhere we could find a place to lay our head.
Why did you go back? Why did you go backtrack across?
Okay, the reason we left the camp was the Russians. They were coming in. They were close enough we could hear small arms fire. At that time, they had already taken Berlin. And Berlin was on the inlet down there, and we thought they had us trapped. We'd be liberated by the Russians, which, thank the good Lord, we weren't. Because some of those people who the Russians had liberated have never been heard of yet. That's even today. Anyway.
The Russians, if they caught any Allied prisoners of war behind their life, call them, I don't know, enemies, and they're on like the labor camp still. I mean, they live in Siberia.
Yeah, that's what everybody was saying.
Upside down, George.
Upside down again.
Take us a while to get to.
Call it British flag.
Now, that's kind of an overhead view of camp. It wasn't too bad in camp. There had 10 barracks in each logger, A, B, C, and D. And A, B, and C were Americans, and D was a mixture of everybody. They had Russians, they had British, they had South Africans. They had a little bit of everything in that camp. There was a disturbance in the Russian barracks over there one night, and Hundsfuhrer, or the dog handler, sent his dog in to quell the noise. He got the bones back. They ate his dog.
Oh, that, those
Why don't you explain what those buildings were in that picture? Which was what was barracks, what was you might say a mess hall or whatever. Like the big, in D photo there, the big building to the.
Stick.
Let me go to this one, because this is the one where I was. I was in this barracks over here. I was in student 10, the student section. That's room 10. In each room, there were 24 men. There were 2,500 of us in this camp. And this little deal here was the pond for fire protection and so forth. And that's where we raced our little sailboats that we made. This was the mess hall or community building. We didn't have much use for it. And here is two latrines over here. And that's just about all there was at camp. And breakfast, we went over to the mess hall. Each room took their pitcher over and got hot water. And then in the evening, we got another meal.
What were your meals like?
Yeah, sometimes we had barley soup, sometimes potatoes, sometimes we got dehydrated alfalfa, complete with worms. And, well, I don't know, I don't remember a whole lot. We got some fresh vegetables, always got carrots.
Rutabagas?
Rutabagas. Had some of the largest carrots I've ever seen before or since. I'm not exaggerating a bit. They were big around my arm and that long. And we always said that it was because of the good fertilizer. They got it from our latrine.
Were there collaborators and things like that, like we see, you know, like Stalag 17, the movie?
Oh, yes.
Recycle food.
Yeah, recycle.
Approximately how many guards maintained that prison camp?
I don't know how many guards maintained it. That's their barracks out there in front. But at the time they marched us out, we had several guards to start with. But then we got guards which were World War I veterans.
Home guard, right?
What?
The home guard.
The home guard.
Bolster.
And
Militia.
yeah, they were all old men. And compared to us, of course, we were in our 20s. They might have been 40, I don't know. But anyway, that was the guards we had. And one of the comical incidents, we were walking along late in the afternoon. We were barely putting one foot in front of the other. And a little Russian boy, that was quite a character to begin with, we said, "What you doing back here in the back, dude?" Dubenik was his name. He's on back here and helped the guard. He ran over and grabbed the guard's rifle and put it on his shoulder and started marching with him. And of course, there was no use of us going anywhere because we knew the war was about over. We were the bargaining chips. Hitler had already issued the order to shoot us if they hadn't done it. But the World War II, World War I vets, they were pretty understanding, and they'd had enough of war themselves. They were about as good to us as they could be, but they couldn't be very good to us.
Was that camp run by the Luftwaffe or the Wehrmacht?
Both. We had names for all our guards. We had Big Stoop, we had the Green Hornet, Iron Cross, Chick. We had names for all of them. And the Green Hornet, he was the Wehrmacht, wore the green uniform. That's where he got the name Green Hornet.
When they left, did they just walk away? I mean, when they thought the war was over, they just left, or how did they do that?
No. We were over in a little town in Himmelsberg, Germany, east of Lüneburg. And two Canadian enlisted men and one British officer came into town and got us out of or didn't get us out. That's another story in itself. They came through. The people gave up real easy. There was no fight. I think there were 2 or 3 shots fired. I remember one stuck his head around the corner to see what would happen. About that time, a bullet zinged off of the brick wall from the barn. He jumped back and said, "That damn fool shooting me." I don't know what he expected, but anyway.
That was the guard that said that? Was the guard that said that?
No, this is one of the POWs.
Some hairline.
And So anyway, we got, my buddies and I, there were 4 of us, was in a group. Well, you had to kind of team up in order to survive.
Well, when you walked out of that camp, what did the Germans do, the ones who had charge of the camp? Where did
I
they-
don't know why.
They just disappear.
Yeah.
I really could care less. But anyway, what happened to us was the British officer says, take all the guns you got and break the stocks off them, render them unusable. Well, they did. And then he found out that down the road about half a mile, there was 50 SS troopers in the woods down there. And here we were with nothing to protect ourselves. Well, my friend and I had a German submachine gun. It was just about a copy off of our Thompson, so we knew how to use that. And him and I took good care of that. But on this march, there was 4 of us. We had our jobs. Max and I was the food gatherers. We gathered food whenever we could. And Bob built a fire to cook it with. And Jack tried to find a place to lay our blankets down where we'd have a spot to sleep. And that was the team we had formed. Well, the day of our liberation, it was no different, except Jack didn't have to go find a place to sleep. We'd already had our spot picked out in the barn. And Max and I found a German supply truck. And we got a lot of food in a hurry. We took it back. Bob had a fire built, and he was cooking. We had sausage, we had cheese. I don't know what all we did have. And along with it, we had some brandy. And there was 3, I think it was 3, I'm not sure. Whether it was 2 or 3. German wax came by. So we invited them to eat with us. And they sat down and ate. And we felt they were probably hungry too. And after they ate, they weren't going to leave. We had some girlfriends that we didn't want. And that was extra baggage. But anyway, we were supposed to have a group come in and pick us up in a couple hours. So the German officer said. They didn't show up that afternoon. The next morning we decided that wasn't going to get it. We had walked all we were going to walk, and we were going to do it on our own. So we found a 39 Chevrolet converted to burn wood truck, 1.5 truck. Well, we couldn't get it to go. So I took the submachine gun and went over the hill to talk to this German farmer about getting his tractor going and pull the truck and get it started. He didn't understand a bit of my German, none of the English, until I took that machine gun off the shore and pointed at him, and he started to understand all of it then. And then he got his tractor going, came over and pulled the truck, got it started, and we started out. It was Max, Bob, Jack, and I. And anyway, we got into Lunenburg. And there they pushed all kinds of vehicles off to the side of the road, and we decided that we deserved something better than a 1.5-ton truck. So we saw some kind of sedan. I don't have any idea what kind of automobile it was. Bob grew up in a garage up in Minnesota. The first thing he did was grab a pocket knife, reached up under the dash and cut all the wires. And at that time, here come a line. Oh, you caught all that. That's my lawyer. Okay, we'll get another one. So So we found a German Jeep. We started to gather food mostly, food and gas. And we had that Jeep so loaded, there's barely there would be 4 of us there. And we headed down to the Elbe River, across the river there. There's a pontoon bridge, that blasted the other bridge down, it was down at the bottom of the river. And we got down there and the British major standing there telling us we couldn't take that Jeep across the pontoon bridge. And he says, you walk across the bridge and there'll be trucks over there to pick you up. Well, we found out how the British supplied us trucks already. But Bob was driving and he pulled off to the side. The officer says, leave the keys in it. We told him didn't have keys. He said, well, just leave it run. So we were sitting there in the Jeep deciding what we were going to do. And the British truck convoy going across that pontoon bridge. And of course there was rubble on either side, all wreckage of the buildings that had been destroyed in the battle. Just wide enough cleared out for trucks to get down to the river, to go across the river. And Bob pulled that Jeep in between a couple of British trucks, and there was no place for it to go except forward. Got back up the whole convoy. The old British major, you goddamn yoinks, you goddamn yoinks. We went across the pontoon bridge. And we had in our mind we were going to go to Paris, sell the Jeep, and have a big party. We got down the road a little ways, and they said, well, there's a place fixed up where you can have a bath, get some clean clothes, and a hot meal. Well, it's been a year since we had a hot meal. And our clothes was as filthy as they could ever get. Besides that, we had enough lice to supply everybody in the United States, I think. But we stopped. There, the British took our Jeep. We got caught. Well, another reason we stopped because Jack had dysentery so bad that he needed medical attention. He was bad. And, that was primarily why we stopped. But we got our Jeep taken away from us. Anyway, May 8th, they got us some transportation. We got into Brussels, Belgium on May 8th. While we were on the airplane flying into Brussels, we found out that Germany had surrendered. So we got into Brussels and went to Queen Anne's Barracks, manned by the Canadians. Now we were back with Americans. And so we got our Canadian uniform, clean clothes, deloused. We were on top of the world there, Bob and Max and I. And this picture I've shown here is, that's the 3 of us, Bob and Max and I, taken at Bob's house in Minnesota in '46.
Did Jack make it or not?
Yes, he made it.
He got well. He got well.
Yes, he got well. He's living in Sarasota, Florida now. That's 3 Max and Bob and I in '82. We get together about, as close as we can, to May 2nd. That was the day we were living here, every year. And
You've been down here.
this, yes, this is last year. Up Lake of the Ozark. Bob is no longer with us. But Exactly, it's in Sarasota, Florida. And, we still keep in contact with one another. In fact, week after next, Max and I will be Lake Texoma fishing.
Can you tell us anything about your airplane? Did it get shot down by a fighter
Yes.
or a flak? Or?
We got shot down by flight at Hamburg, Germany. About 10 o'clock in the morning. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. 10 months, 16 days, 4 hours later, we were liberated.
How many people got out of the airplane?
All 10 of us got out. One was killed, one was out. After we got out.
So you had kind of a good landing, I guess, and kind of a not so crash landing. Or you jumped?
Jumped.
Oh.
All 10 of us jumped.
Is that a hard airplane to get out of?
No, it wasn't.
The one killed on the ground, was that by enemy forces or from the landing, crash landing?
I really can't get it. I had one picture I wanted to show you here. I showed you some old airplanes. I wanted to show you a new one. Yeah, here it is. The what?
F-117A,
I don't know.
black jet.
That was
Stealth fighter.
Yeah, stealth fighters taken to the Paris Air Show.
How do you know? You can't see it.
That was in 93.
We saw it at Harrison last year, they came by and did a night dance.
Oh, is that what it was?
That's what it was. Young fellow behind me said, I died and gone to heaven. He didn't take care of signal. And you didn't hear it until it got
Yeah,
toxic.
that's,
Very quiet.
Streamers, like the streamers we use on the jet, we just send the streamers on the wire, put a sign up stuff by it.
upside down, no, I guess not.
The streamers hang.
No, it's okay.
Everybody's like,
You know,
I was looking at the middle.
Pretty
good.
top in there, that's what the memorial
Couldn't believe it.
stone they have at the air base for the 448
Already walk around, touch, look at.
and
Where's it at? In England?
in England, Sealy, England.
Is that a cemetery, that stone behind there, top of that tree?
I don't know what's in that.
Sure looks like it.
Oh, that's like tombstones there to
He said this was a memorial, so there's some up front.
I don't know, that's for the 448 bombers.
Well, we've got to get some printed, but they're, I changed the address on that one.
The top is the church in Sealy, England. The top right-hand photograph is me and Tracy Everson, who lives in Sealy, and one of the wheels is making a museum there. And when I go over and see her in August,
That's the control tower, right?
that's the control tower of the 448 pump.
Typical World War II.
That's typical. All our bases have it alike. They have a little glass building on the top. If you have any questions,
Okay.
I'll try to answer. I don't know whether
How long did you walk after you left the prison? And
we left prison camp on February 6th, and we were liberated on May 2nd.
Well, how far did you walk?
Well, I think it's about 400 miles. I'm not sure. It's in that book I've got in here. I have it listed day by day.
How many of you walked out at the same time?
But, there was 10,000 in that camp.
So the guards went with you on the road?
And we thought that we were sewed up by the Russians, no way out, but they got us out over at Peenemünde.
I mean, who did this? The Germans?
The Germans got us out.
They knew what the consequences were, right?
They didn't want anything to do with those Russians. And I don't blame them.
Nobody did.
But when you went west and then you made a loop back,
Yeah.
why?
We walked from there over into between Hamburg and Hanover. And we ran into the British troops. And so then they headed us back east. Then we crossed the Elbe River again. And then we're kind of killing time, I guess, because Germans put us in that one barn. It was pretty comfortable barn.
But you said you weren't all together on that one.
No, they split us up into smaller groups.
But why didn't the British take you under their wing then instead of sending you back?
British didn't have us yet.
Oh.
You were just getting in the
We
British
was
area?
just getting close to them.
So the Germans turned around, turned
So
you
the
around.
Germans turned around and went the other way.
What was it? You were with the Germans?
We were still with the Germans.
Oh.
How did they feed you? Forage off the land or?
Whatever they could, whenever they could.
They went in and stole from the farmers in order to feed you, is that it?
Yeah, one of the fellows got into a potato bin there in farmer come along. Nick, mine, der Reichs. So he shoved him over into the Reichs potato bin. Soldier come back, Nick, der Reichs. And so he got back in the farmer's potato bin. One of the amusing incidents there was a little patch of rhubarb, big as this room or a little bigger. And we were told to leave that rhubarb alone. And they put an armed guard on there to see that we left it alone. 30 minutes later, there was a stalk of it left. We got to be pretty accomplished thieves. In a situation like that, if you saw somebody sneaking around in a position to where he could steal something, you created a diversion, something to attract their attention. We got pretty adept at that.
Did they learn, did you guys like learn German in the camp just so you could talk with them or not really?
I've been over there 4 times since. I can't speak very much German now.
Right, but I mean, did you you just picked up phrases that you could understand what they were ordering you to do or anything like that?
No, most of it was sign language. They didn't want to learn English. We didn't want to learn German.
Sounds American.
Learning German wasn't one of our priorities.
No, I just got to pick it up as you heard
Key
it.
words you pick up pretty quick.
It was screenshot down to 44 and 41, right?
Yeah.
You would have learned German if you'd been there.
Don't call pretty quick.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they teach you that much. You learn how to go to the bathroom, places like that. I can do it a little more sophisticated now. I can ask various their hair and toilet, and they understand that. Back in those days, I didn't know those words.
Did they make the POWs build some of those barracks, buildings that you were in?
No, not in ours. Those barracks were kind of interesting. That camp we were in, the barracks were on concrete piers, about that high off the ground. And this was right up there next to the Baltic Sea. The water table was about 6 or 8 feet below the surface. And so we had a double barbed wire fence around it. And in between those barbed wire fences was a trench about 6 feet deep.
Took care of tunnels real quick, didn't it?
That took care of tunnels. You couldn't get down through your floor, and you couldn't burrow out there without being flooded. So they put some thought about where they built the camp.
So that 400 miles you walked, you were shepherded by Germans that whole time, but they weren't really hostile. They were helpful, but they still had guns, I guess, huh?
Well, they still had the guns.
Right.
Of course, it wouldn't have been difficult to escape at that time, but,
What
if
falls?
they caught you, that was all of it. That was the end.
Yeah.
There's no questions, no debate or anything. You just shot right then and there. So why take the chance?
So they were, like you said, they were using you for a bargaining chip. They wanted to keep you intact, alive, but not loose.
Right.
Okay.
And one day, on that march, we were strafed by Spitfires. And friendly fire, as they call it today. That's when we gathered our clothing up and put POW out in the field, and they left us alone after that. And there was a German tank, went into a barn, quarter to a half mile away from where we were. And I don't know whether it's Spitfires or Hurricanes now, I don't remember. But they came in there and evidently they saw the tracks of the tank going into this barn. Because they zeroed in on it. I was standing out there trying to watch the show. And so they lined up with their 20 millimeters and then cut the, I think, 3 or 4 inch rockets they had. Cut those loose at the barn for that tank. And I heard something whistle over my head and land in the thatched roof of the barn we were in, and then I never watched the next pass. I found a hole.
Were people, prisoners punished or killed for any various reasons? I mean, while in camp, were they
No, they were,
not to
Wasn't
that?
real mean.
mean.
Yeah.
They kind of held pretty close to the Geneva Conference.
At that time.
Up to it.
Yeah.
While we were in camp, they did. We had one group, and I thought, my friend Max, but we had a group that were ran into camp. The dog bit us.
Did you get the Red Cross boxes
Occasionally.
that the Germans doled out to you when they felt like it?
Well, they gave us excuses. They said that they didn't have the trains because Allied Air Forces was shooting their trains down.
Good talking points.
But I'll tell you another story I ran into. You got pictures of some of them out here. The Black Group, the Black Treasure,
Tuskegee.
the Tuskegee Institute. I got acquainted with one of their pilots that had been a POW. The Havre French fellow was waiting for the boat to come home. And he was talking about shooting on the train. And he said he lined up on the engine and said, damn engine wouldn't blow. And he said, I stayed right in there until I just had to pull up. And he said, when I did, I pulled up right over that engine, it blew up. He said, I shot myself down. And then they dressed him in a loincloth and a bamboo cage and paraded him down the streets of Berlin saying that we captured African natives, making them fly our airplane.
Old Neil Leroy.
What about your mail? Did you get mail? Could you send mail?
Yes, I have a letter here I got. Didn't get much. I think we were allowed 4 postcards and 2 letters a month.
Oh, you mean to send out?
To send out, right. Now here's a letter I'd written on that I'd written to my folks.
How often did you, of course it depends on how often people wrote, but did mail come every day? Did it come
No,
in?
oh no.
None.
I've probably got 2 letters.
The whole time?
I remember my mother had written in her letter, my father was working in the field north of Alvin. Well, Alvin was her brother, another farmer over in Kansas. And the field north of his house was the airfield. It was Army Airfield. So that got past the censor.
A little code there.
You might mention about the telegrams to your parents when they said you were missing and then you had been found.
That's in this place after.
Oh, yeah.
Was all the people there with you, were they all air crews? All of them,
Oh.
all the camps?
All air crew, yeah.
Russian and everything, all air crew?
Well, now, I don't know about the Russians. We didn't get to fraternize with the Russians in it. All we got was secondhand information where they.
What about medical, George? For any of the crews that did bail out or whatever the situation was that had injuries from minor to major injuries, how were they treated as far as medical attention?
None?
Just let them know.
Now, that's not true altogether. I can't say that, but in camp we had. Now, I have a friend here in Springfield who was hurt. In fact, he was with the underground about 30 days before they caught him. And he was put in the German hospital and made friends with the German doctor. And him and the doctor are still in contact. About a year ago, the doctor called him and he said, we spent about 40 minutes on television. And the German doctor had written his wife. He said they had him as a captive and said he was well.
Did they make you do
Military
any
doctor
work?
or civilian?
Sir?
Is it military doctor or civilian? Or do you know?
I think he was a civilian.
Did they make you work in the camp since
No.
you were enlisted?
That was one of the reasons why air crew members were all sergeants, buck sergeants retired. And Raymond said something about me being staff sergeant. I was staff sergeant, I don't know, a couple, 3 days maybe. Because it was when we was doing the cross, it was down in San Antonio. I was supposed to report for reassignment to another place after we got home from overseas. I didn't show up. The next day I went down and I said I was AWOL yesterday, but I reported today. That's fine, get in line, no problem. Well, I don't want to be reassigned because today I have enough points for a discharge, and yesterday I didn't. And he said, oh, well, we'll be getting that one. And that was the day I got promoted from buck sergeant to staff sergeant. They said, oh, you were supposed to have been a staff sergeant. So then they gave it to me.
Did you get back pay and all that stuff? Or?
Well, we had a year's pay accumulated.
Did the U.S. Army treat you decent, I guess? I mean,
Well, we got some interesting stories on that too. We were at Lahore, and the three of us were still together. And you got in line for breakfast. When you got your breakfast, you went back, got to the back of the line. You'd be there for lunch. And we decided that was a lot of nonsense. So we found the supply camp. We got our own food. Needless to say, we used the same tactics we've been using for the last 3 or 4 years. And the mess sergeant came around our tent one opening. We had any salt and pepper, but he didn't have enough to season what food he had in the mess tent. But we got to where we take care of ourselves. And then on board ship coming home, that was another interesting experience. They had Max guarding the galley.
Like the fox in a trap.
They had me guarding the captain's cabin. And Bob was working in the ship's bakery. Now they had all this set up so that all former POWs would have 3 meals a day coming home. And so the radio operator happened to know my buddy Max, and he was down talking to him. He said, "We'd like to have some food up there in the radio shack." And it was right across the hall from the captain's cabin. He said, "Well, I don't know about that guy upstairs." Max says, "Well, you want?" Says, "I think I can take care of him." So we ended up helping supply the radio shack. And then the thing that really took the cake was a few hours later, we had a Marine sergeant of the guard, and he came along and caught me asleep, laying down on the floor in front of the captain's cabin door, and Max was up on one of these stand-up tables asleep. You thought we'd have shot the president the way he carried on, but we got fired off of our job. So we had to go to 2 meals a day. Well, that hurt us a lot because we had fresh bread. Bob was still working in the bakery. And we had a pretty good supply at the radio shack. We had friends there. We wasn't worried about that 3rd meal.
You're kind of troublemaker, weren't you?
Troublemaker?
Who, me?
How do you consider a troublemaker? You're just taking care of ourselves. That's all.
The soldier doesn't come up short.
Looking after number 1.
Yeah.
He was a true Air Force person. I can tell you that.
Hey, I used to freelance out in the Air Force.
You learn real quick how to appropriate.
Well, you were upgraded on May the 2nd, and you were heading for this bridge with the German, what they call Kuba wagon, or whatever kind of Jeep it was. So, were you in friendly territory or occupied by friendly?
British occupied
It
territory.
was British occupied, so you weren't having to worry about German civilians or military or anything like that where you was roaming around?
We still had our machine gun too.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty convincing piece of equipment.
Right. But I mean, you weren't having to face German opposition as such.
No, after we crossed the Elbe River, there was German soldiers for at least 30 miles. There was 4 abreast walking down the road.
Prisoners? German
Yeah,
prisoners?
they were prisoners, but they weren't guarded.
Yeah.
They were civilians.
Headed back home.
Headed back home. I guess that's where they were headed, I don't know.
Yeah, enough killing. I guess you just want to walk away.
And I know one time there was a train went by with boxcars, and it was full of little kids like that. And this German guard was walking on, and he says, "Kriegs nicht gut, alles Kinder." And I never know that German Kriegs is war. And so he just said war is no good until they were all kids in these boxcars. I don't know where they were taking the kids. And I don't know what the name of the camp was either, maybe a British camp up in the north. It was close to one of the horror camps, and you could smell it. So, I had an interesting thing happen here a couple of years ago, when I took a cruise to Alaska. And one of the evening meals we went to, the man across the table from me said something, and I said, "Oh, you were a Kriegie." He said, "Yeah, I was." So we got to visiting, and there was a German couple we made friends with on this cruise. And we were, the 3 couples that were sitting here together, and we found out the German had been an American POW.
Huh.
So we all had a pretty good time together.
Where do you mention the Creek?
That is what we call ourselves. Full name of our camp was Victor Fireman Lugger to Hoofhoffman Fear.
See why it's freaky now?
So that's why on some of your information you got Creek.
Yeah.
The Germans were known as goons.
Yeah.
That's what Creek is for.
I remember as a kid going out here at O'Reilly and seeing the MPs with Thompson machine guns walking around the perimeter, and there was the blue coveralls with the big red POW on the back of Italian and German prisoners here at Springfield.
You couldn't have run them off the club.
And the Germans were not in good shape though, because the Italians was always beating on them. They were blaming the Germans for getting them involved in all this, and the guards had to literally protect the German prisoners from the Italian prisoners.
I read an article on the German who was sent over here to the States that was a POW. He said he had one uniform in the German army. And he came over here, and the first thing he did when they get here, they started feeding him 3 times a day and give him 3 uniforms, and he says, and this is the enemy? So,
Where was he a prisoner?
I don't remember. I did know another man here in town who was a American prisoner of war. Can't think of his name now. I call him the Dutchman all the time. But anyway, he said that he was British, caught by the British, went over to the Americans. He said, after I saw the Americans for them a while, he said, I wanted to be one of them. He said, I liked the way they thought, the way they talked, the way they fought. He said, it was all out when they fought. But he said, I decided I wanted to be one of them. So he got his Canada and finally came in here.
This is the Germans.
You don't ham on Christmas, you'll win them over everything.
Well, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thanks, appreciate that. We went through many more just like you. We had a gentleman here earlier this morning, a friend of Roger's that was also a POW. And he couldn't stay because he had some